Director Ridley Scott and his historical film Kingdom of Heaven are a perfect representation of the phrase, "I gave you life, I'll also kill you." The only difference is that he didn't give life to it, but rather revived it. This is exactly what Ridley Scott did with large-scale historical films in 2000, when he released Gladiator, which went on to become a huge box office hit worldwide. After Gladiator, Ridley Scott lost his status as Hollywood's biggest loser, and Russell Crowe quickly became a superstar, earning $20 million per role. Following Gladiator, Hollywood produced several more expensive historical films. Every year, theaters would release a new epic film with a budget exceeding $100 million. However, the public's interest in large-scale historical films wasn't as strong as it appeared after Gladiator. Even the box office successes Troy and The Last Samurai, despite having much larger budgets, couldn't outperform Gladiator in terms of profit. While these films managed to break even at the box office, other big historical projects flopped, causing studios to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. This is especially true for the 2004 films Alexander and King Arthur. Ridley Scott returned to the genre in 2005. Although Ridley had repeatedly stated that he wanted to make a big movie about the Crusades, Kingdom of Heaven came into his life entirely by accident. Gladiator's success established Ridley Scott as a major director. All the Hollywood studios started throwing money at him, and Scott gained the freedom to choose and promote his expensive projects within the industry. After releasing Black Hawk Down, Ridley Scott's interest shifted to the Tripolitan War, also known as the First Barbary War. His new film was supposed to focus on the conflict between the United States and the North African states of the Maghreb, which were involved in piracy in the Mediterranean in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The rise of piracy began when Napoleon Bonaparte drove the Order of Malta, which protected Europe from corsairs, out of Malta. After gaining independence, the United States, like many European countries, paid tribute to the pirates. However, when Thomas Jefferson became president of the United States, he sent ships to the Mediterranean to save money. At first, the war was limited to small naval skirmishes, resulting in damage to a couple of American ships. But in 1805, the Americans reached a tipping point and stormed the strategically important city of Derna, backed by Muslim mercenaries. Soon after, the pirates surrendered and asked for peace. Russell Crowe was supposed to play the lead in the film. The actor really wanted to get back on a horse and wave his saber. The film nearly went into production in 2002, and the crew even started building sets in Malta. However, the studio backed out at the last minute, wanting to somehow reduce the budget that had risen well above $150 million. Frustrated, Russell Crowe took on a role in Master and Commander, while Ridley Scott focused on directing a movie with Nicolas Cage. When they were both available, work on the film was ready to resume. The studio agreed to a $150 million budget, and the crew went back to building sets in Malta. This time, the plans were derailed by the failure of Master and Commander. Because Ridley Scott's new film was supposed to feature naval battles, the studio panicked and eventually canceled the project. That's when the idea of Kingdom of Heaven first appeared. Screenwriter William Monahan invited Ridley Scott to read his new script, Tripoli, which was set during the Crusades. Naturally, Scott's eyes lit up. Kingdom of Heaven wasn't intended to be as expensive as it turned out to be. Monahan's original script was significantly shorter, but it was further trimmed before being presented to the studio to avoid alarming the management with its enormous length. After reading the script, which opened with the protagonist waking up on the shore after a shipwreck, the studio decided to take a chance. Once the script was approved, Monahan confessed to Ridley Scott that his script was actually much longer, but he had to cut it down, fearing that the studio would never approve of a 4-hour film. Ridley Scott had no issue with the film's 4-hour length. He assured Monahan that he could even write the script for a 5-hour movie, and promised to handle the matters with the studio himself. There is a fun fact about this story. Because the film's entire opening was added to the script at the last minute, no one bothered to make any connections between the script's original and extended versions. It wasn't until the editing stage, long after filming had wrapped, that the filmmakers first considered this. As a result, the shipwreck sequence was added to Kingdom of Heaven right before the film's release. For the scene, Ridley decided to use a quick CGI model of a ship. He also used footage of a sea storm and outtakes from his film White Squall, which he found in his archives. Several shots of Orlando Bloom's character were combined from various footage shot in Jerusalem and digitally modified. That's why this scene in the film looks a little rough. Ridley Scott assumed that Russell Crowe would also agree to play the lead in his new surprise film. But it turned out that Russell had already been cast as the lead in the film's Cinderella Man and wouldn't be available for a year due to the extensive preparation time required. Crowe, however, still wanted a role in Kingdom of Heaven, even if it was minor, and he got one. He was supposed to play King Richard I, but it became apparent during filming that he wouldn't be able to travel to another continent, so the role went to Ian Glenn. When it became clear that Russell Crowe wouldn't be able to defend Jerusalem, Ridley Scott approached Orlando Bloom, but the actor initially declined the offer too. He had just finished filming Troy, so when his agent mentioned another historical film, he strongly opposed the idea. He changed his mind after Ridley Scott personally called him. Bloom later said that he simply didn't know who the film's director was, but when he found out it was Ridley Scott, he accepted the offer without any hesitation. Filming took place in Morocco and lasted 4 months. In terms of scale, it was the largest filming ever done in the country. At Ridley Scott's request, the King of Morocco personally provided the production with 1,500 military personnel, who depicted Christian and Muslim armies in the film. Filming also took place in Spain for a month, where the crew built an entire village where Orlando Bloom's character could work as a skilled blacksmith. While they were in Spain, Liam Neeson joined the cast. Since he hadn't prepared for the role and joined Kingdom of Heaven at the last minute, he knew nothing about the Crusades and kept pestering Ridley Scott with questions. When Ridley grew tired of it, he gave Liam Neeson a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to the Crusades by Paul L. Williams. Neeson later said that the book was extremely informative. After filming concluded, Ridley Scott presented the studio with a 3-hour, 20-minute film. Upon viewing it, studio executives asked Scott to cut the film down to a more manageable 2 hours and 20 minutes. Ridley was reluctant at first, but the results of the studio's test screenings convinced him. He agreed to cut the film on the condition that he publicly disown the theatrical version after its premiere and play a minimal role in its promotion. Since Ridley Scott distanced himself from the film, 20th Century Fox promoted it as a historical action movie with elements of romance. The director later stressed that Kingdom of Heaven isn't just an action movie, it's a historical epic exploring religious conflict. After the premiere, most critics and viewers noted that the film felt incomplete and incoherent. All this contributed to the project's mediocre critical reception. When Kingdom of Heaven hit theaters in May 2005, it grossed only $211 million on a $130 million budget. Many analysts believe that the studio contributed to the project's poor box office performance by releasing another film, Star Wars Episode III: Revenge of the Sith, just 2 weeks after Kingdom of Heaven. This might be partially true, but even so, postponing the release wouldn't have helped the film pay off. After a while, the studio admitted their mistake and invited Scott to make a director's cut. It ended up being only 10 minutes shorter than the original version, which Ridley Scott presented to the studio right after filming. For 20th Century Fox, Kingdom of Heaven wasn't that big of a failure. The film's final budget was only $110 million, thanks to tax breaks received in Morocco and Spain. Furthermore, the director's cut of the film, released on DVD, grossed over $50 million in the North American market alone. Therefore, the failure didn't affect the business relationship between the studio and the director. Ridley Scott later directed several more films for the studio, including the box office hits The Martian and Prometheus. Ridley Scott once had a years-long conflict with Warner Brothers after the studio decided to cut down his Blade Runner. In the case of Kingdom of Heaven, Scott acknowledged that such a long film would be difficult for audiences to sit through in theaters. While the film's failure caused no problems for Fox or Ridley Scott, it dealt a devastating blow to the genre of big-budget historical films. Major Hollywood studios started canceling similar projects one after another. Vin Diesel, whose dream project Hannibal the Conqueror was almost at the finish line, was also left with nothing. The actor had no choice but to return to Fast and Furious. And yes, Kingdom of Heaven is thought to be the project that led Grandpa Scott down the wrong path. According to Ridley Scott and screenwriter William Monahan, the unnamed character, played by David Thewlis, was actually an angel on a mission from God. There are no signs of it in the theatrical cut, but there are 2 moments in the director's cut that suggest it. One where Thewlis' character literally disappears after a conversation with Balian, and the other where he brings Balian back to life after he was attacked by 3 assassins. After this film, the director started to include more and more references to God in his subsequent works. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and stay tuned.